The letter bore the seal of the War Office. Thomas held it up to the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, and his hands trembled, not from fear of its contents, but because he knew Elara was just on the other side of the fence, watering her red roses, as she did every Thursday. He could hear her humming softly, a tune he had unintentionally memorized after 3 years of living side by side. 3 years of polite good mornings, 3 years of shy smiles over the wooden fence, 3 years of guarding a desire he never had the courage to put into words. But now, holding that paper which smelled of fresh ink and destiny, Thomas felt something inside him break, like a dam finally giving way. He didn't think. He just opened the back door, crossed the small garden in long strides, and was on the other side of the fence before he even realized what he was doing. Elara looked up, surprised, the watering hose still in her hand. "Thomas?" she said, and there was a question in her brown eyes, a concern he had never seen before. He didn't answer with words. He just held out the letter to her with one hand, and with the other he touched her face, the first time he had ever touched her in 3 years. Her skin was warm, soft, real. Elara looked at the paper, then back at him, and then she understood. The green of the uniform, the war that was swallowing men by the thousands, the farewell no one wanted to say. "I leave on Monday," Thomas whispered, his voice broken and desperate, "and I can't go without you knowing." Before she could ask what, he pulled her to him and kissed her. It was clumsy, urgent, wet with the tears streaming down her face, or were they his? It didn't matter. It tasted of salt and roses, and all the years lost to silence. When they pulled apart, Elara was breathless, her fingers clutching his shirt, her eyes wide and bright. "Why did you wait so long?" she whispered, and there was anger in her voice. Anger, love, and desperation all mixed together. Thomas had no answer. He just held her face in his hands and rested his forehead against hers, knowing that this kiss, their first, could very well be their last. But how did 2 neighbors who barely spoke reach this moment? How did one piece of paper turn 3 years of silence into one desperate kiss? To understand, we must go back to the beginning, to the day Elara moved into the house next door, and Thomas realized his quiet life would never be the same. This is the story of Elara Morgan and Thomas Whitfield, 2 neighbors, who lived side by side on Little Ashford Street in Hampshire, England, during the darkest years of the Second World War. But this is not a story about battles or military strategy. It is about silence, about the words we leave unsaid, about how it can sometimes take a lifetime to admit what the heart has known from the very first glance. Now let us return to 1937, 3 years before that kiss, at the fence. Thomas Whitfield was 24 years old and worked as an assistant at the Hampshire Municipal Library. He lived alone in the modest house he had inherited from his grandmother, a house with a front garden and one in the back, where he cultivated tomatoes and herbs that never grew very well. He was a quiet man, with round glasses and brown hair that was always slightly disheveled, the kind of person who went unnoticed in a crowd. His days were predictable: wake at 6, tea and toast, walk to the library, catalogue books, return home at dusk. Until, one June morning, he heard the sound of a moving truck on the other side of the fence. The house next door, empty since old Mr. Patterson had passed away, finally had new tenants. Thomas peeked through the kitchen window, pretending to wash the breakfast dishes. He saw boxes being unloaded. He saw a middle-aged couple, the Morgans, he would later learn. And then he saw her. Elara Morgan was 22, with wavy brown hair pinned up in a loose bun, and she wore a blue floral dress that danced in the wind. She was carrying a box of books. He could see the spines even from a distance, and was laughing at something her mother had said. When she turned her face toward his house, for the briefest second, their eyes met. Thomas felt his stomach tie in a strange knot, as if he'd forgotten to breathe. She smiled, just the polite smile of someone who realizes they're being watched, and went inside. Thomas stood there for 5 full minutes, the dishes forgotten in the sink, his heart beating in a way it hadn't in years. And then he thought, with a frightening clarity, I'm going to fall in love with her. And that is going to be a problem. He had no idea how right he was. Because Elara Morgan wasn't just pretty or kind. She was the type of person who lit up a room. And Thomas Whitfield was the type of man who always stayed in the shadows. The first 6 months were a silent torture. Thomas saw Elara every day. It was impossible not to. Their windows faced each other. Their gardens were separated only by a white picket fence that barely reached waist high. She left every morning at 7:30, always with a book under her arm, walking to the primary school where she worked as an assistant teacher. She returned in the late afternoon, tired but still smiling, and dedicated at least an hour to her garden. Thomas learned her routine as one memorizes a poem. He knew that on Tuesdays she watered the roses. He knew that on Saturdays she read on the wooden bench under the apple tree, barefoot, her legs tucked under her. He knew that when she was happy, she hummed old melodies, the ones her mother sang inside the house that carried through the thin walls. He memorized every detail, either unintentionally or perhaps all too intentionally. But speaking to her, that was different. Thomas rehearsed entire conversations while organizing books at the library. "Good morning, Elara. I see you're reading Bronte. I'm a fan as well." Or, "Your roses are lovely this year. What's the secret?" Simple, normal phrases any neighbor would say, but when he actually saw her, when their gazes met over the fence, all he could manage was a shy wave and a mumbled, "Good morning," before looking away. Elara always replied, always smiled, but there was something in her eyes Thomas couldn't decipher. Curiosity, disappointment, he didn't know. He just felt he was wasting something precious, like sand slipping through his fingers. It was November 1937 when the first real moment between them happened. A violent storm swept through Hampshire during the night, the kind of storm that rips off shingles and fells trees. Thomas woke to the crash of something heavy falling in the yard. He turned on the light, threw a coat over his pajamas, and went out to investigate. The rain was still falling, fine and persistent, soaking everything. The fence. One of the posts had snapped, and 3 planks lay on the ground in Elara's garden. Thomas cursed under his breath. He'd have to fix it before the wind took the rest. He was examining the damage when he heard the back door of the neighboring house open. "Is everything all right?" Elara's voice cut through the darkness. Thomas turned. She was on the doorstep, wearing a thick robe and holding a lantern. The golden light illuminated her face, and he realized she looked worried. About him, or the fence. "The storm knocked down part of the fence," he replied, surprised by the firmness of his own voice. "Sorry about the noise. I'll fix it tomorrow morning." Elara came down the steps and walked to the broken fence, barefoot on the wet grass. Thomas wanted to tell her she'd catch a cold, but he fell silent as she approached. She examined the damage, biting her lower lip. "My father can help," she offered. "He has tools and, well, I know how to use a hammer too, if you need it." Thomas blinked, surprised. "You?" She laughed, and it was such an unexpected, genuine sound in the cold, dark dawn that Thomas felt something warm in his chest. "I grew up helping my father fix everything in the house. My mother said I should be more feminine, but I've always liked practical things." Elara crossed her arms, the smile still on her lips. "So? Do you accept the help, or are you the proud type?" He should have said no. He should have insisted he could handle it alone, but instead, Thomas heard himself say, "I accept. Thank you, Elara." It was the first time he'd said her name out loud, and the way she tilted her head, as if listening to a beautiful song, made Thomas realize she was saving this moment too. "Tomorrow, then," she said, retreating toward the house. "At 9, my father will be at church, but I'll be here." Thomas nodded, unable to form more words. He watched her disappear through the door, the lantern light flickering until it was gone. He stood there, under the fine rain, his heart beating out of rhythm. The next day, Elara appeared at 9 o'clock sharp. She wore work trousers and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She carried a toolbox and a smile that seemed to say, "Let's see if you can keep up." They worked side by side for 2 hours. Thomas held the planks while Elara hammered the nails with impressive precision. They talked, really talked for the first time. She told him about her students at the school, about how much she loved teaching children to read. He talked about the library, about the old books that arrived as donations and sometimes contained forgotten letters or photographs between the pages. "It must be like discovering secrets," Elara commented, running her hand over the newly repaired wood. "Fragments of lives no one remembers anymore." "Exactly," Thomas replied, and for the first time he didn't look away when she met his gaze. When they finished, the fence was sturdy again. Elara wiped her hands on her apron and smiled, satisfied. "It looks good. We make a good team." Thomas nodded, trying to ignore how much those words moved him. A good team, as if they could be something more than just neighbors. "Thank you for the help," he said. I couldn't have done it alone." "Liar," Elara laughed. "But it was fun and—" She hesitated, biting her lip again. "If you ever need anything, Thomas, just call me. We're neighbors after all." She said it as if it were a simple thing, but to Thomas it felt as though she had opened a door he thought was locked forever. In the following months, the dynamic shifted. Not drastically, they were still just neighbors, but there was a new ease. Elara waved more emphatically. Thomas sometimes left fresh tomatoes on the fence for her. Once, she reciprocated with a lemon cake she had made with her mother. "I hope you like lemon," said the note tucked under the cloth-covered plate. Thomas ate every crumb, savoring not just the cake, but the idea that Elara had thought of him. But they were still nothing more than polite neighbors. Thomas didn't have the courage to cross that invisible line. And Elara seemed to be waiting for something he couldn't give. Time, however, waited for no one, and 1939 was approaching. September 1939 arrived like a clenched fist. Thomas was at the library when they heard the announcement on the wireless. Great Britain had declared war on Germany. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children in the kids section fell quiet, as if they could feel the weight of those words. That night, walking home, Thomas saw that the lights in the Morgan house were all on. He heard raised voices, not exactly fighting, but tense discussions. Elara's father was saying something about duty and country. Her mother was crying softly. Elara said nothing he could hear. In the following days, Hampshire changed. Young men began to enlist. Shops started rationing food. Air raid test sirens tore through the quiet afternoons. And the fence between their gardens, the one they had repaired together, seemed more like a border than a simple divider. Thomas noticed Elara was different. She still went out to the garden, still watered the roses, but she didn't hum anymore. Her shoulders were tense, her gaze distant. He wanted to ask what was wrong, but he didn't know how. After all, what was he to her besides a shy neighbor who never had the courage to say what he truly felt? It was on an October afternoon that Elara finally broke the silence. Thomas was trimming his herbs when he heard her voice closer than he expected. "Thomas?" He looked up. She was on the other side of the fence, arms crossed, her face pale. Can I talk to you about something important?" His heart leaped. "Of course. Do you want to come in? I can make tea." Elara hesitated, then nodded. It was the first time she had ever entered his house. Thomas tried not to think about how much that meant as he boiled water and prepared 2 cups. They sat at the small kitchen table, and for a long moment neither spoke. "My brother enlisted," Elara finally said, her voice trembling. "James, he's 20. He hasn't even finished his studies, but he said it was his duty. He left yesterday morning." Thomas felt his chest tighten. He knew James only by sight, a tall lad with an easy smile who sometimes helped his father in the garden. "I'm so sorry," was all he could manage. "My mother is devastated," Elara continued, staring into the cup between her hands. "My father is trying to be strong, but I heard him crying in his room last night, and I'm scared, Thomas, so scared." She looked up, and Thomas saw tears shining there. Without thinking, he reached across the table and touched her hand. It was a light, hesitant touch, but she gripped his fingers as if they were a lifeline. "I'm scared too," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how long this will last, but—" He squeezed her hand. "We are here. Now. That has to mean something." Elara let out a wet laugh, wiping her tears with her free hand. "You've always been so quiet. I thought you didn't even notice I existed." Thomas felt his face burn. "I notice, I've always noticed." There was so much weight in those words that the air between them seemed to change. Elara looked at him, really looked at him, and Thomas saw something ignite in those brown eyes. Hope? Recognition? "Why did you never say anything?" she whispered. "Because I'm a coward. Because I was afraid of being rejected. Because men like me don't deserve women like her." But instead of saying any of those truths, Thomas just shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm saying it now." They sat there, hands clasped on the table, as the tea grew cold and the world outside fell apart. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a declaration, but it was something. A fragile, tenuous beginning that they both held with care. In the following weeks, they grew closer. Not openly, there was still a caution, a fear of naming what was growing between them. But now Elara knocked on his door when she needed something. She'd ask to borrow sugar when rationing got tight. She'd bring cakes her mother made, claiming they had leftovers. Thomas reciprocated with books from the library romans he thought she would enjoy. Sometimes she would appear at the fence at dusk just to talk. "What are you reading?" she'd ask. "Hemingway," he'd reply. "And you?" "Austen for the third time. Let me guess. Pride and Prejudice?" She would laugh. "How did you know?" "Because you're the type who believes in happy endings." Her smile would falter. "And you don't?" Thomas would look at her, at the way the evening light hit her hair, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, and think, "I want to. For you, I want to believe." But what he said was, "I'm trying." In December, snow covered Hampshire. The streets turned white and silent, and people retreated into their homes. Thomas woke one Saturday morning and saw Elara in the garden, trying to clear the snow from her path. She wore a thick coat and gloves, but was trembling from the cold. He didn't think. He just put on his own coat and went out to help her. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he interrupted, taking the shovel from her hands, "but I want to." They worked together in silence, the steam of their breath mingling in the cold air. When they finished, Elara's cheeks were red from the cold, and she was smiling in a way that made Thomas's chest ache. "Thank you," she said, clapping her gloved hands together to knock off the snow. "Always," he replied, and he meant so much more than just shoveling snow. Elara took a step toward him. She was so close, Thomas could see the snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. Her eyes scanned his face, as if memorizing every detail. "Thomas," she whispered, "I need to ask you something." His heart stopped. "What? Do you feel anything for me?" The question hung in the cold air, heavy and inevitable. Thomas could have lied. He could have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. But something in the way she looked at him, vulnerable, hopeful, brave, made him find his courage. "I do," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "Since the very first day you arrived, I feel so much it hurts." Elara's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were happy tears. She let out a shaky laugh and covered her mouth with her hand. "Why did you never say?" "Because I'm an idiot," Thomas answered, and it was the truth. "Because I thought you'd never look at someone like me." Someone like you? Elara repeated, incredulous. Thomas, you're kind. You're intelligent. You see me, really see me. Did you really think I didn't notice the way you look at me, as if I'm something precious? He didn't know what to say. He could only look at her, at the woman who had occupied his thoughts since 1937, standing there in the snow, finally saying everything he wanted to hear. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elara took another step. Now they were so close, she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. Now, she said slowly, we stop wasting time. She waited. She didn't kiss him. She waited for him to make the choice, for him, finally, to cross that last distance. But Thomas hesitated. There was a war. There was uncertainty. There were 1,000 reasons not to get attached, not to love, not to risk. And still, he wanted to. God, how he wanted to. But fear won. Instead of kissing her, Thomas just touched her face with his fingertips, a touch that promised everything but delivered nothing. Can we go slow? He asked, hating his own cowardice. Elara closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, there was disappointment there, but also understanding. We can, she agreed, taking a step back. But Thomas, don't take too long. Neither of us knows how much time we have. She said it like a warning, like a prophecy, and in 1940, as the war intensified and the draft letters began to arrive, Thomas would finally understand what she meant. Because sometimes, when you wait too long, you almost miss the chance to say what your heart has known all along. January 1940 brought the cruelest cold Hampshire had seen in decades. Ice coated the windows in the mornings, and people walked the streets with scarves wrapped up to their noses. But it wasn't just the winter that was freezing, it was the fear. The news on the wireless grew worse each day. Germany was advancing, more men were being called up, more families were grieving. Thomas and Elara fell into a strange routine. They were more than friends, less than lovers. He visited her almost every evening. They would sit in the Morgans' living room, her mother knitting in an armchair and her father reading the newspaper, while they talked about books, about Elara's students, about anything but the war. Sometimes their hands would touch accidentally on the table. Sometimes he would catch her looking at him with an intensity that made his stomach flip. But Thomas never took the next step. He never kissed her. He never said, "I love you," even though the words were always on the tip of his tongue. There was a voice in his head that whispered, "What if you're not good enough? What if she realizes she deserves someone better?" Elara, for her part, waited. He saw the waiting in her eyes, her patience wearing thin, the silent question, "When will you stop being afraid?" It was on a February night that everything almost changed. Thomas had brought her a book, a first edition of Jane Eyre he had found in a donation to the library. When he handed it to her, wrapped in brown paper, Elara opened it with reverent care. "Thomas, this is too valuable," she whispered, running her fingers over the worn cover. "It's yours," he said. "You always said it was your favorite. And I wanted you to have something special." Elara looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. Before Thomas could ask why, she stood, walked over to him, and hugged him. It was a tight, desperate hug he hadn't expected. He froze for a second, then wrapped his arms around her, smelling the lavender in her hair, the warmth of her body against his. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for everything, for seeing me, for being here." Thomas closed his eyes and wished that moment could last forever. But then they heard Mr. Morgan's discreet cough, and Elara pulled away, her cheeks flushed. They didn't talk about the hug afterward. But Thomas felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, he was enough for her. March arrived with constant rain. Mud took over the streets, and everyone walked around with soaked clothes and grim moods. Thomas was cataloguing books on a grey afternoon when the head librarian, Mr. Harris, entered the back room with a grave expression. "Whitfield, I need a word with you." Thomas put down the books, his heart speeding up without knowing why. "I received a call from the ministry," Harris continued, taking off his glasses to wipe the fogged lenses. They're calling up more men. Everyone between 18 and 41. You're on the list. The world stopped. Thomas heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Him, drafted. He had always thought the library was essential work, that it would keep him from the front. When? His voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. The letter should arrive soon, but from what I was told, you're to report by the end of the month. Thomas nodded mechanically. Harris squeezed his shoulder hard, a gesture of silent solidarity, and left. Thomas stood there, surrounded by piles of books, feeling the floor open up beneath his feet. Elara? How was he going to tell Elara? He managed to finish the workday on sheer willpower. He walked home in the fine rain, not bothering to open his umbrella. When he arrived, he was soaked and shivering, but not from the cold. Elara was in the garden, even with the rain, wearing a hood and gathering the last of the herbs before winter killed them. When she saw Thomas, her face lit up. "You're drenched. Get inside, you'll catch your—" She stopped, looking closer. "Thomas, what happened?" He couldn't answer. He just stood there in the rain, looking at her as if memorizing every detail. Elara dropped her basket and ran to him. "Thomas, you're scaring me. Talk to me." "They're drafting me," he finally said, his voice broken. "The letter is coming. I have to go to war." Elara's face went pale. She shook her head slowly, as if she could deny reality. No, you work at the library. They can't—" "They can," Thomas interrupted. "And they are." Elara covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with horror. Thomas saw the exact moment the realization hit her. He was leaving, just like James, just like thousands of other men, and he might never come back. "When?" she whispered. "End of the month, maybe 3 weeks." 3 weeks, she repeated, desperation in her voice. "Only 3 weeks?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Elara took a step toward him, then another, until they were so close he could see the raindrops on her eyelashes. "Then we have no time to waste," she said, with a determination he had never seen before. "Thomas, listen to me. We don't have time for your fears. We don't have time for hesitation. If you are leaving, if you are going to this damned war, I need you to tell me now. Tell me what you feel." His heart was beating so hard it hurt. "Elara, Say it," she demanded, her eyes shining with tears and anger and something deeper. "Say it, or I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." Thomas took a deep breath. All the barriers he had built over the years, all the fear, all the insecurity crumbled at once. "I love you," he said, and the words came out like a confession, a relief, a surrender. "I've loved you since the first day. I love you when you laugh, when you hum in the garden, when you bite your lip while reading. I love you so much it hurts to breathe. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry it took me so long to say it, that I was a coward, that I wasted all this time." Elara kissed him. She didn't wait for him to finish. She just pulled him down and pressed her lips against his, wet from the rain, warm, desperate. Thomas wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if she would disappear if he let go. The kiss was everything he had imagined and more. It was a promise and a farewell, a beginning and an end. It was years of silence finally broken. When they pulled apart, they were both crying. "I love you too," Elara whispered against his lips. "I always have, and I was so tired of waiting for you to realize you deserved to be loved." Thomas rested his forehead against hers, his fingers tangled in her wet hair. "I'm an idiot." "Yes, you are," she agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. "But you're my idiot." They stood there, holding each other in the rain, as the world continued to spin around them. 3 years, 3 years wasted in fear and hesitation, and now they had only 3 weeks. "We'll make every second count," Elara said, as if reading his thoughts. "Every minute, every hour. We won't waste any more." Thomas nodded, kissing her again, slower this time, savoring, memorizing. "I promise." The 3 weeks that followed were the most intense of Thomas's life. They saw each other every day. They walked through the fields around Hampshire, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Elara took him to her favourite spot, a small hill overlooking the valley, where she went when she needed to think. Thomas read poetry to her by candlelight, his soft voice filling the silence of the closed library. She taught him how to dance in her kitchen, laughing when he stepped on her feet. But always, always, there was the shadow of the clock. Every kiss tasted like goodbye. Every hug was a little tighter. And Thomas saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear he felt. What if these were their last 3 weeks together? "Don't think like that," Elara would whisper when she saw him drift away. "You will come back. You have to." "What if I don't?" he asked one night, his voice breaking. Elara held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then I will wait for you on the other side. Wherever you go, Thomas Whitfield, my heart goes with you." They were romantic, impossible words, the kind he always thought only existed in books. But when she said them, he believed them. And then it came. The last Thursday before his departure, the day the letter would arrive, the day everything would change, the day of the kiss at the fence, that desperate kiss that began our story. The letter arrived exactly as the ministry had promised, on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a solemn-faced postman who couldn't meet Thomas's eyes. The envelope was white, official, cold to the touch. Thomas held it up to the kitchen window light, and for an absurd moment he wished he could just tear it up and make it all disappear. But he couldn't, so he opened it with trembling fingers and read, "You are to report to the Hampshire Railway Station on Monday, 25th of March 1940 at 06 hours. Bring only the essentials. Your king and country need you." Monday, 4 days. He had only 4 more days with her. It was in that moment he heard it, through the open window, despite the cold wind. Elara's voice, humming in the garden. That melody he knew so well. And something inside him broke. Not the part that was afraid, the part that still hesitated. He didn't think. He opened the back door and crossed the garden in long strides. He was on the other side of the fence before he even realized what he was doing. Elara looked up, surprised, the watering hose still in her hand. "Thomas!" He held the letter out to her with one hand. With the other, he touched her face, her skin warm, soft, real. And then he kissed her. That kiss that opened our story. That desperate, urgent kiss that said everything 3 years of silence never had. When they pulled apart, Elara was crying. "Why did you wait so long?" she whispered, and there was anger in her voice. Anger, love, and desperation all mixed together. Thomas had no answer. He just held her face in his hands and rested his forehead against hers. "Forgive me," was all he could manage. Elara closed her eyes, tears streaming freely. "There's nothing to forgive. Just don't leave me. Not like this." "I don't have a choice." "I know," she sobbed. "I know, but that doesn't make it any easier." They stood there, holding each other in the middle of the garden, while water from the forgotten hose formed a puddle at their feet. The world kept spinning. There was a war. There was a draft. There was death waiting somewhere far away. But in that moment, there was only the two of them. That night, Thomas went to dinner at the Morgans' house. Elara's mother had made a heroic effort to prepare something special with what little rationing allowed. A beef stew with potatoes, fresh bread, and even an apple crumble she must have been saving for a special occasion. They all knew why. It was a farewell. Mr. Morgan shook Thomas's hand firmly. "You're a good man, Whitfield. Take care of yourself out there." Mrs. Morgan hugged him, crying softly. "Bring my son back if you can, and you come back too. Elara needs you." Elara said nothing during dinner. She just pushed food around her plate, her eyes red from crying. When they finished, she took Thomas's hand under the table and squeezed it hard. "We're going for a walk," she said. It wasn't a request. They left without coats, even as the March cold cut their skin. They walked in silence to the hill, her favorite spot, where they had gone so many times in the last 3 weeks. The moon was full, illuminating the valley below like a silver sea. Elara finally spoke, her voice low and broken. "I wrote something for you, a letter, but I couldn't finish it because every word felt like a goodbye, and I don't want to say goodbye." Thomas pulled her into his arms. "Then don't say goodbye. Say, 'See you soon.'" "See you soon," she repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "Do you promise you'll come back?" He wanted to promise. He wanted to swear on everything holy, but it would be a lie, and he couldn't lie to her. "Not now. I will do everything in my power," he said instead. "I will fight, I will survive, and I will come back to you, Elara Morgan, because now that I finally have you, I'm not giving up." She buried her face in his chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Thomas held her tight, memorizing the feeling, the scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth of her body, the sound of her uneven breath. "I have something for you too," he said after a long silence. He took a small, leather-bound book from his pocket. "It's a journal. Blank. I thought you could write about your days, your thoughts, and when I come back, I'll read every word. I'll know everything you lived while I was away." Elara took the journal with trembling hands, running her fingers over the soft cover. "And you? Will you write to me?" "Every week," he promised. "No matter where I am, you will get my letters." "Promise?" "I promise." She lifted her face, and in the moonlight, Thomas saw not just sadness, but something else, a fierce, almost wild determination. "Then give me something to remember," she whispered. "Something to keep me strong when you're gone." Thomas kissed her, not like before, not with desperation or urgency, but slowly, deeply, like a sealed vow, a kiss that said, "I am yours, you are mine, and not even a war can change that." When they pulled away, they were both crying. The next few days passed in a blur. Friday, Thomas organized his belongings, very little to take. Saturday, he spent the entire day with Elara, walking through town, visiting the library, sitting on the bench under the apple tree in her garden. Sunday, they went to church together, and Thomas prayed for the first time in years to a God who might not have been listening. "Protect her," he whispered, kneeling on the cold pew. "No matter what happens to me, protect her." Sunday night, they sat in the Morgans' living room. Her parents had gone to bed early, leaving them alone, a silent gift, a tacit permission. Thomas and Elara stayed on the sofa, bodies entwined, saying nothing. There were no words left. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes that remained. "Don't go," Elara whispered at 2 a.m, when he finally said he had to go home. "Stay here just for tonight." Thomas kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "You know I can't, but I'll be back in the morning to say goodbye." "I don't want to say goodbye," she cried. "I hate that word." "Then it's not goodbye," he murmured against her lips. "It's see you soon. It's wait for me. It's I love you and I will always love you." Elara nodded, unable to speak. Thomas kissed her one last time and left into the cold night. When he got home, he couldn't sleep. He just stood at the window, looking at the house next door, where a light stayed on in her room. She wasn't sleeping either. She was also waiting for the dawn. Monday arrived, grey and cold. Thomas put on the only good suit he owned, combed his hair carefully, and picked up the small bag he had packed. It was 5 a.m. He had 1 hour before he needed to be at the station. Elara was waiting at the fence. She wore the blue floral dress, the same one she wore the day they met. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she was smiling. A sad smile, but a smile nonetheless. "You look beautiful," Thomas said, his voice hoarse. "And you look very handsome," she replied, straightening his tie with trembling hands. "I almost don't recognize my quiet neighbor from the library." They laughed, a wet, broken laugh, but a laugh all the same. "Elara," Thomas began, but she put her fingers on his lips. "No, let me speak first." She took a deep, steadying breath. Thomas Whitfield, you are the kindest, most patient, most frustrating man I have ever met. You made me wait 3 years, and I should be furious, but I'm not, because every second with you was worth it, and I will wait however many years it takes for you to come back to me. Thomas felt the tears burn. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, she agreed, smiling, but you have me anyway. He kissed her, a long, deep kiss that tried to encapsulate everything, all the love, all the fear, all the hope. When they pulled apart, he took something from his pocket. My grandmother gave me this, he said, opening his hand to reveal a small silver ring with a blue stone. It's nothing grand, but it was hers, and I want you to have it, as a promise. Elara looked at the ring, her eyes wide. Thomas, is this a request? He finished. When I come back, if you'll still have me, I'll do this right. I'll get on one knee. I'll ask your father for your hand. But for now, wear this, and remember me. With trembling hands, she let him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. I accept, she whispered, however long it takes. I accept. The church bell began to chime 6 o'clock. Thomas had to go. I have to, he started but couldn't finish. Elara nodded. I know. She took a step back, then another, holding the ring to her chest. Come back to me, Thomas, please, come back. I will come back, he promised, picking up his bag. Wait for me. He started to walk. Every step hurt. When he reached the corner, he turned one last time. Elara was still there, standing at the fence, one hand raised in farewell. The morning light lit up her hair, and for a moment Thomas wanted to run back, to drop everything, to stay. But he couldn't, so he just waved and turned the corner. The last thing he heard was the sound of Elara crying, and the last thing he thought was, I will come back. No matter what, I will come back to her. The first few weeks were the worst. Thomas was sent to a training camp in the south of England, a grey place of lined-up tents and men with tense faces. He learned to march, to shoot, to follow orders without question. At night, lying in a narrow bunk surrounded by strangers who snored and mumbled in their sleep, he would pull Elara's letters from his pocket and reread them by the dim light of a lantern. She wrote every day, long, detailed letters, full of small stories about Hampshire. She told him about the students at school, about how Mrs. Patterson from up the street had lost her cat, and the whole neighborhood helped look for it. She told him about the roses in the garden, about the rationing getting stricter, about how her mother was learning to make bread with less flour. But between the everyday words, there were other things. I wear your ring every day. People ask, and I tell them I'm promised. Mrs. Collins said I'm too young, but I don't care. I'm yours, Thomas, wherever you are. Or, I dreamed of you last night. We were on the hill, and you were reading poetry to me. I woke up crying because it felt so real. I miss you so much sometimes I can't breathe. And always, always at the end. Come back to me. Please come back. Thomas replied when he could. His letters were shorter. He couldn't talk about where he was or what he was doing. The rules were strict, but he tried to give her pieces of himself. I saw an incredible sunset yesterday. It made me think of you. Everything makes me think of you. I met a soldier named Arthur. He has a wife in Liverpool. We talk about you two at night. It helps, knowing I'm not the only one with a broken heart. I love you. I don't write it as often as I should, but it's true. Every beat of my heart is your name. In May, Thomas was sent to France. The reality of the war hit him like a punch. It wasn't drills or simulations anymore. It was mud, blood, the deafening sound of bombs, men screaming. He saw things he could never describe to Elara, things that woke him up sweating in the middle of the night. Arthur, the soldier from Liverpool, died in an ambush in June. Thomas held his hand as the life drained out of him, heard him whisper his wife's name one last time. Afterward, he sat with the letter Arthur had carried in his pocket, a letter from her, stained with blood, and cried. That night he wrote to Elara, I don't know if I'll make it back. I don't know if I'm strong enough. but I think of you every hour, and that keeps me alive." Her reply arrived 3 weeks later, and it was furious. "Don't talk like that. Not you too, Thomas Whitfield. You are strong, stronger than you think. And I am here, waiting. Don't you dare leave me, not after everything." He read those words 1,000 times. He carried the letter in his shirt pocket over his heart. When things got too hard, when he saw things no man should see, he would touch the paper and whisper, "For her. I'm doing this for her." July, August, September. The months dragged on like centuries. Thomas lost count of how many battles he fought, how many friends he saw fall. His body was thin, marked by scars. His eyes held a hardness that wasn't there before. But he still wrote. Every week, without fail, a letter for Elara. Her letters were his salvation. She told him James had been wounded but was recovering in a hospital in London, that her mother was calmer now that her son was alive, that Hampshire carried on day after day, waiting for the men to return. "I go to the hill every week," she wrote in September. "I sit in the same spot where you asked me to wear your ring, and I imagine you here with me. Sometimes I talk out loud, as if you can hear me. People must think I've gone mad. Maybe I have, but you promised to come back, Thomas, and I believe in promises." He replied, "Don't go mad just yet. Wait until I get back. Then we can go mad together." October brought news that changed everything. Thomas's company was being transferred back to England for 2 weeks, a brief respite before being sent to North Africa. 2 weeks. He would have 2 weeks at home. Thomas wrote to Elara immediately, his hands shaking with emotion. "I'm coming back for 2 weeks. I'll be there in 10 days. Wait for me." When the letter arrived in Hampshire, Elara was teaching at the school. The headmistress called her to the office, where a telegram was waiting. She opened it with trembling hands, and when she read it, she let out a sound between a laugh and a sob that made the headmistress smile. "Good news?" "He's coming back," Elara whispered, clutching the paper to her chest. "Thomas is coming home." She could barely teach for the rest of the day. Her mind was far away, planning. 10 days. She had 10 days to prepare. She cut her hair. She mended the blue dress. She cleaned the house from top to bottom. She bought, with the few ration coupons she had saved, ingredients to make the lemon cake he loved, and she waited. Thomas arrived on a rainy Tuesday in October. The train whistled into the station at 3 in the afternoon, and he stepped off with his worn-out bag and creased uniform. He looked different, thinner, with older eyes, a small scar on his left eyebrow. But when he saw Elara waiting on the platform, everything else faded away. She ran. She didn't care about the people watching. She just ran and threw herself into his arms with such force she nearly knocked him over. Thomas held her, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender that reminded him of home. "You came back," she sobbed against his chest. "You came back, you came back, you came back." "I promised," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "I always keep my promises." They stood there, holding each other for so long they lost track of time. People passed around them, other soldiers reuniting with families, goodbyes being said. But for Thomas and Elara, the world was just the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, Elara held his face in her hands, her eyes tracing every detail as if memorizing him. "You look different," she whispered. "War changes people. But it's still you," she insisted, "still the Thomas I love." He kissed her right there in the middle of the station, not caring who saw. It was a kiss of reunion, of relief, of gratitude for still being alive. The 2 weeks that followed were the most precious of Thomas's life. They did everything they could. They walked through the fields, went back to the hill, danced in her kitchen to the sound of the old radio. Thomas read poetry to her by candlelight. Elara made the lemon cake, and they ate every crumb, laughing like children. But there were shadows. Thomas woke up screaming in the middle of the night, in a cold sweat, seeing things that weren't there. Elara would hold him, whispering that he was safe, that he was home. He never told her exactly what he had seen. He couldn't put that weight on her. But she knew. She saw it in the scars, in the way he flinched at loud noises. "You don't have to pretend to be okay," she said one night, finding him sitting alone in the garden, staring at nothing. "Not with me." Thomas pulled her onto his lap, holding her tight. "I just want to be the man you remember. Not this broken thing." "You're not broken," Elara said firmly, turning to face him. "You're wounded, and wounds heal. We'll heal together, Thomas, when you come back for good. When this is all over. And if it's not, what if I don't come back next time?" She placed her hand over his heart. "Then I will love you anyway. Right here, in this place. You will live in every beat of my heart." Thomas kissed her with desperation, with love, with fear. And that night, under the cold October stars, they made promises they knew they might not be able to keep. The last night came all too quickly. Thomas and Elara sat in the Morgans' living room, hands intertwined, in silence. There were no words left. They had said everything. "If something happens to me," Thomas began, but Elara covered his mouth with her hand. "Don't!" "Elara, listen. If something happens, I want you to live. I want you to be happy. Don't be trapped by my ghost." She shook her head, tears streaming. "How can I be happy without you?" "Because you deserve to be. Promise me. Promise me you'll live." Elara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I promise, but only if you promise you'll fight, that you'll do everything to come back. I promise." They sealed their promises with a kiss. The last kiss before he left again. In the morning, at the station, it was harder than the first time, because now they knew exactly what they were losing. "I love you," Thomas said, holding her face. "I will always love you, in every life, in every world." "I love you too," Elara replied. "Come back to me, please. Don't make me wait forever." He nodded. He got on the train. And as he looked out the window, he saw Elara standing on the platform, one hand raised in farewell, the silver ring shining on her finger. Thomas pressed his hand against the glass, a parting gesture, a silent promise. And then the train pulled away, taking him back to the war, back to uncertainty, but leaving his heart in Hampshire in the hands of a woman who swore to wait. Closing conclusion. Thomas Whitfield returned to Hampshire in May 1945, 3 days after the war in Europe ended. He was different, thinner, with more scars, and there was a weight in his eyes that would never fully disappear. But he was alive, and he had kept his promise. Elara was waiting on the same platform, in the same spot. She wore the blue dress mended in a few places now, faded by time and rationing, and the silver ring she had never, in 5 years, taken off her finger. When their eyes met, she didn't run this time. She just walked slowly, as if afraid he would disappear if she moved too fast. "You took your time," she said, her voice trembling. "Sorry," he replied, opening his arms. "I had a few errands to run." Elara laughed, a wet, broken, beautiful laugh, and finally ran. Thomas caught her and spun her around, holding her as if he would never let go. And there, in that station that had seen so many goodbyes, they finally had their new beginning. 6 months later, Thomas knelt on top of the hill, her favorite spot, and asked Elara to marry him. This time with words, with promises they could keep, with a future they could finally build together. She said yes before he even finished the question. They were married in a small ceremony in Hampshire, surrounded by neighbours who had watched their whole story unfold. And when the vicar asked if anyone had any objection, no one said a word. Because everyone knew this love had been tested by war, distance, and time, and it had survived. This is the story of Elara and Thomas. A story about how love sometimes arrives quietly, hidden in shy glances and unsaid words. About how a war can steal years, but it cannot steal what two hearts hold for each other. About how one kiss at a fence, desperate, late, perfect, can change everything. They were just neighbours, until a draft letter arrived, and then finally they stopped wasting time, because in the end, it doesn't matter how long it takes us to find our courage. What matters is that when we finally do, we don't let it slip away. Dear listener, the story of Thomas and Elara is a reminder. It teaches us that our deepest regrets rarely come from the actions we take, but from the words we leave unsaid and the chances we let pass us by out of fear. Like Thomas, many of us build fences around our hearts, believing we aren't good enough. And like Elara, many of us wait patiently for someone to find the courage to truly see us. This story reminds us that time is the most precious commodity we have. Don't wait for a draft letter, a crisis, a loss, a farewell to force you to act. The strongest love is the one that survives the wait, but the happiest love is the one that didn't have to wait so long. If this story of forgotten diaries, yellowed letters, and love found has touched your heart, please consider joining our community. Subscribe, leave a like, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to cross the fence. And tell us in the comments, from what city and country are you listening to this memory today? We love knowing these stories cross oceans and decades to reach you. Thank you for listening.